This video was made possible thanks to InVideo AI. More details coming up soon. Pay attention to what we're about to tell you in this video because it shows the extent to which things are changing in Europe. We're going to see how Finland is tightly closing its border with Russia, but also how it's taken advantage of this crisis to shield its borders and tighten its migration policy as never before. And take note because here, money could be more important than security. VisualPolitik community, Finland is going strong. And we're not just saying that because this country is seriously considering abandoning the Ottawa Convention in order to cram its border with Russia with anti-personnel mines. Something we'll be talking about very soon here on VisualPolitik, so don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. The fact is that just a few days ago, this news story broke that makes it very clear where this Nordic country is heading in terms of migration. Take a look.
Finland suspends development cooperation with Somalia over readmission issues. The Finnish government program explicitly ties development cooperation to two key conditions: the readmission of nationals and support for the international rules-based order.
Helsinki has grown tired of doling out money and getting nothing in return. For example, in the case of Somalia, this country is going to stop receiving the 9 million euros that Finland used to give it every year for development cooperation. The reason? Well, Somalia has stopped accepting Somalis who were expelled from Finland. And in Helsinki, they said, "Oh yeah? Is that really the way you want to play it, huh? Well, don't worry, you won't see another cent from us." This is just one clear example of how things in the Nordic country are changing. But of course, it's not their most determined bet. The key to Finland's U-turn in immigration policy lies in a law that was reformed this past summer.
Parliament approves controversial border law changes. The so-called deportation bill was passed by 167 votes to 31.
Last July, the Finnish parliament passed a legal reform allowing it to turn away migrants who want to enter the country from its border with Russia. No matter whether they're seeking asylum or not, Finland has now made this possibility much more difficult on its border with Russia. A border that, keep in mind, measures some 1,340 kilometers and is by far the longest that any country in the European Union has with the Russian bear. So, what the hell is going on between Finland, Russia, and immigrants? Do so many Russians really want to move to Finland? Well, let's see. The point is that, in this case, we aren't talking about a normal border, but a real hybrid warfare weapon.
At the end of January 2024, Russia unilaterally terminated a border agreement it had had with Finland since 2012. This agreement organized cooperation between the two countries for border control, international crime prevention, and emergency management. But suddenly, wham, the agreement was blown up. And not only that, at the same time, inflows of illegal immigrants from Russia originating from African and Middle Eastern countries began to skyrocket.
And so, in November 2023, for example, some 900 applicants entered Finland from Russia, when the average had been fewer than one per day. Precisely because of this, many thought that Finland had begun to be the target of a hybrid attack, as we had already seen on the border Poland and Belarus shared. A strategy which is based on using waves of illegal immigrants as a tool to destabilize the country.
Instrumentalized migration is one way that Russia can put pressure on and affect the security and social stability of Finland and the EU.
And what did the Finns do? Well, they cut their losses and closed half of all their border crossings with Russia. That was the first thing. And months later, in April 2023, they closed it completely. Not only that, but they have also set to work building a barrier with barbed wire and advanced surveillance systems along more than 200 sensitive kilometers. And VisualPolitik community, this brings us to last summer, when the legal reform we mentioned before was approved. A reform that is controversial, because it means that now it will basically be the border guard who will decide whether or not an asylum request is admissible. In the best case scenario, refugees will have to wait for a decision in reception centers located along the border itself. But also, and this is the most important factor, the door has been opened to hot returns. So if an individual's request is ultimately deemed inadmissible, this asylum seeker will be forced to cross back into Russia.
If there is a young homosexual man coming from Russia, how will the border guards assess that it's risky for him to go back? It doesn't show on the outside.
That's why it's so controversial. Keep in mind that international law prohibits sending or returning asylum seekers to countries where they may face persecution, torture, or inhumane treatment. Now, is Russia's fear of hybrid warfare really the only reason for this strict immigration tightening, as we have been told by Finnish politicians? Or is there actually more to the story? Remember that Finland is not an isolated case. Here Here on VisualPolitik, we've already told you how 2 other Nordic countries, Sweden and Denmark, have been tightening their immigration policies for years, precisely to prevent crime and the creation of parallel societies. But what about Finland? Is the Russian excuse more a way of selling a reform that otherwise would likely have been much more controversial?
Finland's deportation law puts EU's migration norms to the test.
Well, in this video, we're going to tell you everything we've been able to find out about Finland, crime, and immigration to see what exactly is really going on and why this Nordic country is now closing its doors. So, stay tuned. As someone who's been creating YouTube videos for years, I can tell you that a lot happens behind the scenes. Recently, we discovered a tool that has transformed how videos are made. InVideo AI, soon launching its newest version, InVideo AI V3. InVideo AI V3 isn't just any update. It comes with powerful generative capabilities, allowing you to express or communicate your ideas in the form of stunning videos, just like we do. The kind you've always wanted to create. The kind you'd be excited to share within your peers, in the most seamless, intuitive way possible, irrespective of whatever skill level you are at. Let me show you an example of what it can do. Simply ask InVideo, for example, to create a 30-second ad video for YouTube about a cola drink, but strawberry flavored, using wide cinematic shots and close-ups of the product from time to time.
Cola strawberry. A flavor explosion that'll make your taste buds dance. Every sip is a journey to strawberry fields.
But it doesn't stop there. InVideo AI V3's generative media can create anything you can think of, from dramatic storylines to product ads, educational content, and more. Unlike traditional video tools with steep learning curves that only solve for parts of your video creation process, InVideo removes all friction, letting users focus entirely on their vision and their idea. With features like voice cloning to narrate videos in your own voice, InVideo AI V3 truly stands out as the ultimate video creation tool. And here's the best part. You can try InVideo AI for free. But if you want to use their generative capabilities, we highly recommend that you go for the generative plan that starts at $96 a month. It's the one that I have, and it gives you the most bang for your buck with 15 generative minutes. This will save you hundreds of dollars that you would otherwise spend on editing, animating, and other production costs. If you're already an InVideo user, you can simply go to the add-on section and buy generative seconds. Now, back to the video.
In the shadow of Sweden.
No, Finland has not been spared either. Crime has been on the rise in this Scandinavian country for some years now, and many point to the rise of gangs as a major culprit. Gangs engaged in organized crime, particularly drug trafficking and robberies of establishments. To give you an idea, the once tranquil Finland is today the country with the 5th highest international homicide rate in the entire European Union. And not only that, it's also among the 10 countries with the highest rates of robberies with and without violence in Europe, surpassing even France in this area. Well, the question is whether the updated deportation law is targeting the immigrant population in the country, and the question is why. You see, just like their Scandinavian brethren, Finnish politicians have realized that the immigrant population that has been arriving in recent years commits substantially more crime in relation to their proportion of the population. Yes, there may be social and economic factors that explain this divergence, but the point is that, whatever the case, Finnish politicians are no longer willing to tolerate this difference. You see, specifically, while immigrants in Finland represent 5.8% of the population, in 2019, they committed 11.1% of all crimes. In other words, the chance of an immigrant committing a crime is double that of a Finn. And not only that, but if we go to the detailed breakdown, we see that the country's foreign population committed 28% of all aggravated robberies, more than 30% of rapes, and almost 27% of all sexual harassment cases. And in these percentages, do you know which group stands out in particular? Well, none other than refugees. Precisely because of this, it's very likely that the sudden tightening of migration laws being implemented by Finland under the guise of preventing Russia's hybrid wars, in reality also has other motives that have nothing to do with Moscow. And do you know why we think that the real motive is not Russia? Well, because in parallel with the reform of the border legislation, other legislation has also been passed, such as the Citizenship Act, for example. And what do the conditions for access to Finnish citizenship have to do with Russia being able to use hybrid warfare to destabilize the country? Exactly, practically nothing. The question then is, what on earth is this all about? For starters, foreigners will now find it much more difficult to obtain Finnish citizenship. While previously 5 years of residency were required, now the requirement is 8 years. And refugees have had their residence permit in the country reduced from 4 to 3 years. After this time, they will have to apply for the corresponding renewal. It's not a big change, but it does represent a clear change in trend, something that reminds us a lot of what another Nordic country is doing.
Since 2019, Denmark has revoked residency permits for 150 Syrian nationals from Damascus and the surrounding area out of more than 1,300 cases reviewed.
Denmark is one of the countries with the strictest immigration laws in Europe, perhaps the strictest, and its policies are setting an example for others with similar problems. Now, it's Finland's turn. But don't think it ends there. The truth is that we have only just got started. The Finnish government will now also have powers to revoke residence permits for all those who have committed or are accused of committing serious crimes. And incidentally, the number of refugees the country was willing to accept in 2024 has been reduced to 500, a third of the number for 2023. And subsidies to asylum seekers have also been substantially reduced. No more open bar for social assistance. So you see, all this doesn't appear to have much to do with Russia, but rather with a drastic change of course in migration policy that follows in the footsteps of neighbouring Sweden. Well, now we know more or less where this is heading, but the question is, why so much concern? Is Finland experiencing a migration boom like Sweden, so that suddenly the migration agenda has become a national priority? Well, yes and no. Check it out. The numbers of asylum applications are light years behind those of Sweden. Between 2015 and 2022, the land of IKEA received more than 500,000, while Finland barely exceeded 80,000. Nevertheless, in the last 2 years, the land of saunas has seen a doubling of applications, and this has set off all the alarm bells. You know what they say, when your neighbour's house is on fire, look to your own. Well, the fact is that, given this scenario, the tightening that Finland has just undertaken will surely dissuade many immigrants and refugees from opting for this country as a destination. And along with it, the coalition government between conservatives, centrists, and nationalists hope to reduce crime, or at least slow its rise. Now, if you're thinking of a Swedish-style problem of no-go zones, parallel societies, almost daily shootings, and even bombs in the streets, well, no, the situation in Finland is still not nearly that bad. But of course, what Finnish politicians do not want is to be caught out as their Swedish neighbours have been. And there are certainly some data that suggests that if limits are not set in time, things could get out of control in the future. You see, one of the characteristics of crime in Sweden is that it's fueled by the poor integration of many immigrants into society and the economy. The result is that in Sweden, unemployment among foreign-born people is around 15%, compared to 3.6% among native-born people. That is 4 times higher. Well, in Finland, the same thing has started to happen. The rate of unemployed foreigners is double that of the nationals, and this is making the authorities' hair stand on end.
Certain immigrant groups, such as Somalis and Iraqis, have much more difficulty entering the labor market. Some groups have employability rates up to 60% lower than those of Finnish-born people, even after 15 years in the country.
Take note of this because it's wild. Because this situation is not only directly linked to a much higher risk of falling into crime, but it's also linked to another factor that is also of concern for the government: more money in subsidies. In fact, in reality, all this tightening of immigration policy may have more of an economic than a security motive. You know what they say about the Nordic countries? They are huge welfare states that ensure you at least have a good education, good healthcare, and a good house to live in. And that VisualPolitik community fundamentally comes down to one thing: money. The thing is that if foreigners start arriving in an uncontrolled way, this whole system could just blow up, which is partly what is happening in Sweden. And in Finland? Well, logically, this is also happening, and it worries them. And just when public debt has reached an all-time high this year and is not likely to improve anytime soon, their rate has risen from 50% of GDP in 2010 to around 80%, which means that this is already the Scandinavian country with the highest public debt, doubling that of Norway and Sweden. So in Helsinki, they've set to work to try to control the situation before it gets out of control. And for them, that necessarily means cutting off the tap for foreign arrivals to their welfare state.
Cuts in Finnish social security benefits hit almost 500,000 people.
Helsinki has cut hundreds of millions of euros in housing and unemployment benefits, among many other things. And obviously, if you're Finnish and you've been paying high taxes all your life, well, it's probably not something that you're particularly delighted about. But that's the way it is. Now, does this mean that the country doesn't have a problem with imported crime? Well, as we were telling you before, in Finland, Russian, Romanian, and African groups have been detected using people of those same nationalities with money problems to work in drug trafficking. The Albanian mafia, for example, has some foothold in the country, and organized crime imported from Sweden is already starting to become a serious problem in the border areas.
Finnish crime ring mailed drugs worth 700,000 euros. Police say Albanian marijuana made its way to Finland via Spain.
Nevertheless, while in Sweden it's estimated that there are already more than 30,000 gang members, the vast majority of whom are of foreign origin, in Finland it's believed that there are only about 150. Even so, the big problem, is that the contagion effect of the Swedish disaster generates so much fear in its neighbors that it's not surprising that countries like Finland have started to protect themselves, just in case.
The Swedish police commissioner has warned his Finnish counterpart that Finland must take concrete steps to avoid becoming like Sweden in terms of youth crime.
The Swedes themselves tell us so. In short, seeing is believing. Given all this, let me ask you a question. Do you think the tightening of Finland's immigration laws has more to do with crime or money? Well, I suppose there is a debate there, but what seems clear is that the threat from Russia is not the main issue. Of course, this is not to say by any means that such a threat does not exist. In fact, it does exist. And that's what we're going to tell you about next.
The hybrid threat.
Finland has been a country that has seen a lot of immigration. However, in the last few months, one type of immigration has been arriving that we could say is somewhat alarming. Can you guess why? 3, 2, 1, exactly. Arrivals from Russia have skyrocketed. And let's see, this in itself is not a bad thing. In the end, if those who arrive are opponents of Putin's regime trying to flee, then what better than to open your arms wide to them, right? The problem is that the Finnish case doesn't look like that. Do you remember what we told you at the beginning of the video about the border agreement that Finland and Russia had since 2012? The agreement that Moscow unilaterally broke. Well, that breakup was announced in November 2023, although it didn't become effective until a couple of months later. And do you know what happened in 2023? Well,
Finland joins NATO, doubling military alliance's border with Russia in a blow for Putin.
Exactly that same year, a few months before the breakdown of the border agreement, Finland had become the 31st partner of the Atlantic Alliance. And naturally, do you think the breakdown of the border agreement was a fluke? Do you think it was a coincidence that precisely in November of that year, there was a 30-fold increase in asylum applications from people arriving from Russia? Well, we can tell you, not at all. Russia clearly began to use the border as a weapon of war in retaliation for Finland's entry into NATO. And in Helsinki, this was a scenario they were simply not willing to tolerate. What's more, everything indicates that the Russian border authorities, who report to the FSB, Moscow's Federal Security Service, the descendants of the KGB, were behind this increase in refugee inflows.
Finnish officials say the sudden surge in asylum seekers is no coincidence. They accuse Russia of driving the migrants to the border to sow discord as payback for Finland's membership in NATO.
This VisualPolitik community is pure hybrid warfare. A type of warfare without bombs or gunfire that seeks to destabilize an enemy. Strategies such as sending migrants to the neighbor's borders, or carrying out cyber attacks, or spreading propaganda. There's nothing new under the sun. Here on VisualPolitik, we've already told you how Poland and Lithuania suffered the same thing just 2 years ago, with Russia's collaboration with Belarus. And do you know what Finland, Poland, and Lithuania have in common? Exactly. All three respond in the same way. All of them have armored their borders to the hilt.
Finland will indefinitely extend the closure of land border crossings with Russia and add several ports to a list where travel from its eastern neighbor is prohibited.
And keep in mind that this is an event with few precedents for the Finns. In fact, some sources claim that this is the first time Finland has totally closed its land borders with Russia for many, many years. Specifically since the continuation war that pitted the two countries against each other between 1941 and 1944. Hardly a small spat. However, as you already know, Finland has not only closed its borders, but also has prevented the same thing from happening to the country as happened to Sweden. And that is what explains the closed door to refugees, the reduction of subsidies for asylum seekers, the tightening of nationality requirements, and the expulsion of immigrants who have committed serious crimes. And that's why in this video we have started with what many media outlets have told us at the end and in passing. And when it comes down to it, the important thing is not so much Russia, but the fear that both crime and particularly welfare state spending will skyrocket. Because in the end, it's the public debt and high taxes that pay for this extensive welfare state. So there you have it. That is the real problem in Finland that all these reforms hope to remedy. Here on VisualPolitik, we'll be keeping you updated on how things develop in Finland. But for the moment, it's your turn. Will Finland succeed in reducing crime among immigrants with these reforms? Well, leave us your opinion below in the comments, and let's start a debate. And very important, if you liked this video, please like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. Oh, and activate the little bell so you don't miss any upcoming news. As always, thanks for watching, all the best, I'll see you next time.